Have you ever been underestimated, only to rise so high they had no choice but to respect you? This is the story of a black woman they mocked on the runway until she revealed the entire show was her masterpiece. Watch what happens when talent silences every doubt. The velvet curtain parted and the runway lights flared to life, cold, bright, merciless. A sea of elite fashion insiders leaned forward, iPhones in hand, ready to dissect the next look for their glossy blogs and cold critiques. It was Paris Fashion Week after all. The stakes? Colossal. The audience? Ruthless. Then she appeared, not in towering stilettos, not in a slinky high-slit gown. She wore a structured Afrocentric ensemble with bold shoulders and geometric prints in deep indigo and gold. Her stride was strong, her posture regal. Her skin radiated against the sterile white stage. She walked like she belonged there. No apologies, no hesitation. But the laughter came anyway. It started as a stifled chuckle from the second row, someone with a clipboard and a smug smirk. Then a whisper rippled through the seats. "Is she lost?" someone hissed. Another leaned over to their friend. "This must be some kind of statement piece?" A cluster of influencers giggled, fingers dancing across their phones, already typing, "Runway crash." They didn't see fashion. They didn't see power. They saw a black woman where they didn't expect one and decided she didn't belong. Still, she walked. Cameras flashed, but not in celebration. They captured her like an oddity, a spectacle, someone to laugh at, not admire. And yet she never looked down, never broke stride. Eyes forward, chin high, like she could already see through their ignorance to what came next. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that room realized yet, was that the show was hers. Every hem, every cut, every color palette. She hadn't stumbled onto the runway by accident. She had designed it, all of it. And while they laughed, the music was about to shift. The next model would come out, then another and another. Each one would wear her genius, her vision, her hands. But in that first moment, they saw only what they were conditioned to see, an intruder, an anomaly. They didn't realize they were witnessing a revolution. And she was just getting started. Backstage, chaos buzzed like a hive. Stylists wrestled with last-minute fittings. Makeup artists dabbed, blended, powdered. Assistants darted past one another, arms full of gowns, heels, and clipboards. Models waited with the bored expressions of people used to being dressed like dolls. But in the far corner, quiet, composed, stood Imani Rhodes. No clipboard, no entourage, just her sketchbook tucked under one arm and eyes sharp enough to slice through fabric. If anyone noticed her, they assumed she was an intern, or maybe a translator. Definitely not the designer. She didn't carry the trademark aloofness, no flashy accessories, no entourage shouting orders, just a calm woman in her mid-30s with rich brown skin, natural curls, and a quiet authority that made the room seem off-kilter when you looked directly at her for too long. She didn't need to speak. She was watching. Every model, every seam, every missed button. She didn't need to bark commands. One nod from her sent a stylist running. One raised eyebrow had a seamstress redoing a hem in 30 seconds. Imani was in control, but no one saw it. The fashion house behind the show, Maison Alban, had called her 6 months ago, desperate to reinvent their brand. Their words, "We want something bold, something fearless, something that breaks boundaries." They had no idea that the boundary breaker they were hiring was a black woman from Brooklyn who'd grown up making prom dresses for her cousins in a 2-bedroom apartment. They just loved the sketches, the texture, the vision. When the contract came, it said lead designer, not face of the brand, not runway darling, just the architect in the shadows. And that suited Imani fine. Until last night. Until she overheard a creative director, a man with more ego than taste, scoff, "Whoever designed this show better pray the models save it." That's when she made her decision. She wasn't going to let the models introduce her work. She would be the first to walk, not to prove a point, not to please anyone, but to claim the moment that was hers. And now as she watched the crowd laugh from behind the curtain, Imani Rhodes didn't flinch. She smiled, because the show had just begun. Before the runway, before the flashing lights, before the whispers and the laughter, there was a young girl hunched over a sewing machine in a fifth-floor walk-up in the Bronx. The windows rattled when the trains passed. The air was thick with the scent of cooking oil and determination. That girl was Imani Rhodes, and while other kids played outside, she was cutting fabric on the kitchen floor. Her first mannequin was her cousin Kendra, wrapped in the shower curtains and bed sheets, giggling as Imani pinned them into makeshift gowns. Her first fashion show was a family cookout, where she turned folding tables into catwalks and played Beyoncé off her cracked phone speaker. She didn't grow up with Vogue subscriptions or fashion camps in Paris. She grew up with hand-me-downs and a mother who worked 2 jobs and still came home to help her sew labels onto the pieces they sold on Etsy. Every time Imani applied for fashion school scholarships, she was told her designs were too urban or too ethnic. Professors dismissed her patterns as costumey. She once heard a panelist say, "There's no market for tribal futurism." But she kept going. When fit wouldn't accept her, she taught herself through library books and YouTube. When fashion houses ignored her portfolio, she started her own line from her living room. And when stylists stole her designs and renamed them, she stayed silent, but only for a while. Her big break didn't come with glitter. It came with grit. A viral Instagram post, a celebrity stylist in a rush, a custom look Imani whipped together in 48 hours that ended up on the BET Awards red carpet. From there, people started whispering her name. But even as the whispers grew louder, the doors stayed locked, until Maison Alban called. Now, standing backstage at Paris Fashion Week, watching the glittering crowd laugh at her as she took the runway, Imani didn't feel shame. She felt power, because this wasn't some lucky break. This was the result of every sleepless night, every sketch drawn under flickering fluorescent lights, every no she turned into fuel. She wasn't just walking the runway. She was walking over every doubt, every insult, every dismissal that had tried to keep her on the sidewalk. And this time, they would have to watch. The call came on a Thursday morning. Imani was in her tiny studio, formerly the laundry room of her apartment, trying to fix a busted zipper on a bridal jumpsuit for a client who wanted Beyoncé energy on a daycare budget. She didn't answer the first time, or the second. Her hands were full, and besides, the number was international. Paris had said, probably spam. But on the third ring, something told her to stop. Wipe her hands. Pick up. "Hello," she said cautiously. A French voice, smooth and clipped, replied, "Is this Miss Rhodes?" "I'm calling on behalf of Maison Alban. Our creative director saw your collection online. We're very interested." Imani blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" "Maison Alban," the voice repeated, unfazed. "We're planning a reinvention of our fall-winter show. We're seeking a fresh aesthetic, and we believe your work captures something rare." She almost dropped the phone. Maison Alban was one of the oldest, most exclusive fashion houses in Europe, known for their pristine tailoring and painfully pale runways. They didn't just hire people, they knighted them. Their shows were tradition, pedigree, legacy. Imani? She didn't fit any of that. But they didn't ask where she was from, didn't ask about her resume. They had seen her lookbook online, the one with models of all shades, draped in West African patterns, fused with streetwear silhouettes, walking through abandoned warehouses and city streets. They didn't know her story. They just knew her style screamed now. "Would you be willing to design our next collection?" they asked. There was a pause. Imani didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood completely still, as if movement might break the spell. Finally, she spoke. "I'm in." The next 6 months were a blur of time zones, sketches, and soul. She poured her ancestry, her anger, her elegance into every look. Silks dyed like desert sunsets, jackets cut like warrior armor, sneakers with kente cloth trim. She sent everything in, met every deadline, listened to their silence after her photo was sent with her final contract. And when they didn't respond, she didn't flinch. Because deep down, Imani knew the truth. They didn't need to like her. They just needed to see what she could do. And at Paris Fashion Week, she was going to make sure they saw everything. The atelier smelled of steam and ambition. Rolls of fabric stood like sentries along the walls. Hand-dyed indigos, sunburnt saffrons, and jet blacks that seemed to swallow light. Beads, brass, and feathers littered the tables. Tailors worked in hushed reverence, knowing they weren't just constructing clothes, they were building something historic. At the center of it all stood Imani Rhodes. With a pencil behind her ear and pins in her wrist cuff, she moved like a conductor, directing fittings with a whisper, adjusting silhouettes with a nod. She barely slept, barely ate. She was consumed by vision, one that fused tradition with rebellion, softness with strength, memory with movement. She wasn't designing for applause. She was designing for truth. The collection had no name at first, just sketches labeled Ancestor, Dreamwalker, Matriarch. Each piece told a story: a suit with collarbones carved into the seams, a trench coat with lining that resembled African mudcloth, dresses made of layered textiles from across the diaspora, woven together like survival itself. And for the final piece, the finale look, Imani made a bold decision. She would wear it, not a model, not a celebrity, her. A high-collared, gold-embroidered caftan tailored with razor-sharp precision. It was part regalia, part rebellion, a silent declaration. You will no longer erase the hands that build your kingdoms. Maison Alban tried to push back. Traditionally, they said, the designer comes out at the end, briefly. She shouldn't be in the show, another murmured. It distracts from the pieces. But she had signed the creative contract. She was the show. So she smiled and said, then I'll walk first. Let them think it's a mistake. Let them laugh. Let them wonder. Let them clutch their pearls while she flipped the industry on its head. She rehearsed alone late at night under the same lights that would soon shine down on her, not strutting, but walking, intentional, grounded, unbothered. She wasn't going for shock. She was going for legacy. So when the curtain rose and the crowd of critics and influencers saw a black woman walking that runway like it belonged to her, they laughed, for now. But Imani knew what was coming. The masterpiece was already in motion. The room was cathedral quiet just before the show began. Only the sound of camera shutters prepping for war. Rows of fashion editors, bloggers, buyers, and celebrities sat poised like royalty. A-list faces in $1,000 outfits, each one waiting to be impressed or to destroy someone's career with a tweet. Then the lights dimmed, then the beat dropped, and then she walked out. Imani stepped into the spotlight, cloaked in the finale piece, regal, radiant, unapologetically herself. The gold-stitched caftan shimmered under the stage lights like it had a pulse. Her hair was crowned in coils. Her eyes didn't search for approval. They dared it. But confusion rippled instantly. A stylist in the second row leaned in and whispered, "Wait, is this performance art?" Someone chuckled. "Who let the PR rep on the runway?" A woman from a high-end label muttered, "Maybe it's a diversity gimmick." The laughter started like popcorn, popping in patches, small, mocking, smug. Imani heard it all. She felt it, but she kept walking, not faster, not with anger, with purpose. Every step said, "This is mine." Every glare she met with her own, every giggle rolled off her like rain on armor. In the crowd, phones rose, not to capture brilliance, but to catch a blunder. They thought they were documenting a mistake. They had no idea they were capturing history. She reached the edge of the runway, turned slowly and faced them, standing in full silence, letting them see her. Really see her. Then the music shifted. A new model emerged. Then another. Then another. Each one wore pieces that were unmistakably hers. Afrofuturist, street slick, goddess-inspired, culturally precise and hauntingly beautiful. Strong shoulders, vivid textures, silhouettes like poems. The crowd's laughter stalled, eyes narrowed, whispers stopped mid-sentence. One editor flipped through the show notes and froze. Her face drained as she read the words aloud to no one in particular. Creative director and lead designer, Imani Rhodes. The room turned electric. Gasps replaced giggles. People leaned forward, realizing they just laughed at the architect. And Imani? She stood at the edge of the runway. No smile, no theatrics, just stillness. The kind of stillness that says, "You'll never forget this moment, and you'll never laugh at me again." The laughter didn't just stop, it evaporated. In its place, silence so thick it felt like velvet pressed against the walls. Imani had stepped back behind the curtain, but her presence still pulsed through the air like static. Each model that followed her walked with her spirit in their bones, like they knew they were carrying more than couture. They were carrying correction. Gone were the snickers and smug grins. Eyes widened. Pens froze mid-scribble. Influencers stopped live streaming, suddenly unsure of their takes. The audience, who had arrived expecting trends and surface-level glitz, was now staring at something bigger. The garments were alive. One model wore a bodysuit with tribal etchings carved into velvet, like ancient scriptures rewritten in thread. Another had a two-piece suit with shoulders sculpted like ancestral shields. A finale dress bloomed with bold sunburst pleats, stitched with the names of real African queens across the hemline. It wasn't fashion, it was testimony. Even the harshest critics, those known for killing careers in a single sentence, sat frozen, trying to process what they were seeing. You could almost hear their inner rewrites. A fashion director from Milan lowered her glasses. "Who is she?" she whispered to her assistant. Her assistant gulped. "The one they laughed at." And suddenly, the laughter from 15 minutes ago felt like it had happened in a different universe, because now they understood. Imani hadn't crashed the runway. She had reclaimed it. This wasn't diversity theater. It wasn't charity casting. This was vision, power, ownership. In the front row, a seasoned creative executive from Maison Alban, one who had privately questioned hiring her, slowly leaned back in his seat. His face didn't move, but his eyes said everything. "We didn't just hire the right woman, we almost missed the future." And as the final model stepped off the stage, the lights dimmed. There was a full beat, just long enough to hold your breath. Then the room exploded. Thunderous applause, standing ovation, people scrambling to delete tweets they'd almost posted, editors rewriting headlines in their heads. But backstage, Imani didn't gloat. She simply exhaled, because the silence had said it all. They had seen her, finally. The applause roared like a wave breaking through centuries of silence. It wasn't polite. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, rising, and relentless. Even the ones who had doubted her, who had smirked and scoffed when she took the runway, they were on their feet now. Not out of guilt, out of awe. Backstage, Imani stood alone for a moment, head bowed, hands trembling. Not with fear, but with release. She had poured her entire self into this, her history, her pain, her pride. And now the world had finally seen it. A production assistant peeked through the curtain. "They're calling for you," she said breathlessly. "Like, all of them." Imani stepped forward. She didn't rush. She glided. When she emerged again, this time as the designer, not a decoy, the entire venue erupted all over again. The clapping doubled. Cheers rang out from every corner. Phones pointed. Flashes sparked. No one dared blink, because they weren't just clapping for a fashion show. They were clapping for a moment in history. Some mouthed, "I'm sorry." Others offered tearful nods. And in the front row, a veteran designer, once known for guarding the gate, stood, pressed a hand to his chest and mouthed, "Brava." Imani didn't cry. Not here. Not yet. She gave a single elegant bow, and when she straightened, she made eye contact with the crowd. One sweeping gaze from left to right, making sure they knew. She saw everything, every smirk, every whisper, every clap that came too late. Then she smiled, not a grin of revenge, a smile of arrival, because they hadn't just witnessed a black woman succeed in fashion. They had witnessed her own it. She didn't beg for validation. She built the future in front of them and wore it down the runway. By the time the fashion blogs posted, the headline was unanimous across platforms. They laughed at the black woman on the runway, then realized she designed the entire show. And that was only the beginning. And in the end, she didn't need their approval. She had her purpose. What started with laughter ended in legacy. Because when you walk in your truth, even the world's coldest rooms can't dim your light. Imani didn't just change a runway. She opened a door and left it wide for others to follow.